Good morning and welcome to Home Truths. I'm Peter Stimson from MPowered Mortgages, and I'm delighted to have with me Claire Towe from Meet Margo and Ola from All Things Money. Today we're going to be discussing winning the Gen Z home buyer. Gen Z are a generation that's coming up through the mortgage market. Gen Z are 18 to, I think, 27, 28. Is that correct, Ola?
Yes.
So the generation that's coming through the market at the moment. So before we get into that, I'd like our guests to introduce themselves and tell us all about themselves. Ola, would you like to go first?
Yes. So hello, everyone. My name is Ola Majekodunmi, and I'm the founder of All Things Money, which is a personal finance platform that is designed to teach young adults how to manage their finances. So we teach young people how to manage their finances through social media. We have a podcast, live events, and then we also go and deliver workshops through to universities, colleges, and corporate organizations.
And Claire, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. So I'm Claire. I'm co-founder of Meet Margo. We are a tech-first mortgage and protection brokerage focused at helping women in homeownership. We always get asked why women, so I'll clear that up now. When we look at the lifespan of a woman, there's a series of economic shocks that tends to happen throughout her lifespan that really impacts her financial resilience, which in turn impacts her ability to get on or move up the ladder. Everything from pay gaps, career gaps, the impacts of divorce, to living longer with less in her pension pot. So myself and my husband set up Meet Margo 3 years ago. In that time, we've grown to a team of 15 working remotely throughout the UK. And we're very much focused at helping that younger generation of home buyer come through. I think I would like to clear up a bit of a spoiler. I am not a broker, but I do come from a brand and creative background, which I think is my secret sauce in growing the business to where we've kind of grown at, really understanding the customer and what makes them tick. So I'm really hoping the insights that we bring today is useful for you in your brokerages and your everyday workplace.
Okay, fantastic. So before we kick off, I think it's probably worth going through for the audience, what is a Gen Z and how does a Gen Z compare to what the rest of the market or the definitions are? Because obviously we've got a Gen Z, we've got a millennial, we've got a Generation X, and we've got a boomer. Ola, I don't know if you could sort of define what a Gen Z is for the audience and sort of try and categorize them for us.
Yeah, so like you kindly mentioned earlier, Peter, so Gen Z is the generation at the moment aged around 18 to 27 to 28. I am on the cusp of like Gen Z / millennial. And I think what differs with the Gen Z generation to all other generations is that they've grown up digitally native. So they have grown up with technology. So they have grown up with phones, they've grown up with social media. And I think because of that, how we now interact with one another, how we consume our information is completely different. And I think because it's so rapidly evolving, it's really important that we are having this conversation today to know and learn how we can attract that Gen Z audience.
I think as well to add to that, Peter, we have to, UK Finance has come out and said that Gen Z are actually the biggest consumer group, the largest consumer group that is going to have the most impact to financial markets globally. So that's a huge thing. And they're going to be more influential than the generation of baby boomers. We also have to be mindful, as Ola had said, they've grown up in the digital landscape. They've also grown up at a time where they've maybe come to age during or after the 2008 financial crisis. We've then had the pandemic come into things. These guys are really financially savvy when it comes to, they're surrounded by the cost of living crisis. They're surrounded by, tightening of purse strings. So as a result, them as shoppers, them as customers who want to engage with the service, that's going to have an impact in terms of how they kind of, who they're going to choose to work with and why they're going to work with them.
Okay. So they're obviously sort of a different generation and they're sort of consuming media in a different way. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so about 98% of Gen Z are consuming social media. So they're interacting it every single day, whether that, I guess, is on their commute to work, scrolling in their bed, like that. Social media is what they've grown up with. So it's about now how can intermediaries, I guess, connect with Gen Z. And I think for me, I personally think social media is the way forward.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of communication, they're not using traditional media. Is that fair to say? They're not sort of interacting in sort of traditional forms that perhaps the millennials are, or perhaps my generation, which is Gen X, without sort of telling people exactly how old I am. It's basically different forms of media they're using to basically get their information.
I think if I put my advertising hat here in terms of what I've kind of learned in the industry, they're actually the first generation that are more omni-channel. So that means they are dipping into the likes of TV and mainstream media, but they're also heavily on social. So they're, we talk about their love of TikTok, and they might use this as the Google, if you like, if some of us have ailments or anything that we want to find answers to. I know my own nieces and nephews, they'll go straight to TikTok to find out why something's happening or what's happening. I've heard something in the news, I want to make sense of that. So we have to understand that they're showing up in multiple places, and there again it comes back to this financially being savvy, more savvy when it comes to their choices. They're using a number of different platforms to make decisions. So how does that look when it comes to you as a broker or us in financial services? It's showing up in, Ola, I know this is something that you're very keen on as well. It's being present in more than one place. So whilst they might be on your website, they're also checking out your reviews. They're also jumping onto your socials. So they're kind of building a picture of you before they decide, do I want to work with this person?
Agreed, for sure.
Okay. So essentially, it's kind of being present in multiple places at one time is kind of what you're saying, rather than just kind of having one channel of communication. It's having kind of multiple sources, effectively, that they're kind of looking across to kind of get a view of what they're looking for. They're kind of checking out Trustpilot, they're checking out online presence, they're checking out TikTok. It's effectively they're doing a deeper dive into media before they're kind of making a decision process. Is that fair?
Yeah, I agree. I think, sorry, Claire, I think when it comes to our generation, I guess it's really important to remember as well is that everyone in this generation likes to consume their media very differently. So some people like to listen to podcasts, some people like to listen to YouTube channels, some people, like Claire mentioned, like to check things up on TikTok and only want to digest their content in 30 seconds. So I think the question we need to be asking ourselves is, if we're going to be delivering content or want to engage and attract the Gen Z audience, how are we going to do it, and what's the best media to do so? I think for a lot of the Gen Z generation, I think a lot of them will prefer to be met on social media because that's where they're all at.
I think as well, just to add to that, Ola, like we have noticed this trend with particularly the younger Gen Zs coming through to us. So that accounts for 7.3% of our business currently. And we know that that's growing. We know that our brokers are having conversations with a lot of them that they're not quite ready just yet, but it's sending them on their way with the plan. What we're finding is a lot of them are coming to us. We are not the only broker that they're speaking to. They've got some 3, some 4 that they're kind of on the table. And it's nearly like an interview process. Why should I work with you? This is, so again, that harks back into that really being mindful and taking an interest. And this is a big financial thing that's happening in their life, and they don't want to get this decision wrong, because if I'm coming to you as my broker, I want to make sure that you're the right person for the job to get me with those keys in my hand. So again, it's interesting. We actually had one particular example where one of the brokers were like, this is a mystery shopper. It has to be the questions that I'm getting asked, but it wasn't. It's just they're doing their due diligence. They want to understand how you work, what's your process, what's after, they want the detail on that. And I think as an industry, as brokers, I think it's not being too shy about sharing that information. And it's really, looking at, if you are getting questions from that younger generation coming through, look at Q&As, focus on your social, answering those questions, because there's obviously a need there that they want those questions answered.
Is it almost essentially about putting more information at the front rather than necessarily having more information at the back to some extent with some of the Gen Z types these days?
I think it's digestible content. I think when we look at financial information being shared online, there's nothing that isn't already out there. So I've been sharing content online for the last 5 years now, and everyone's always like, well, how do you know everything? And fortunately, I did teach myself a lot of it, but also a lot of it is online. But it's about how do we take all that financial jargon and then also turn it into a way that's relatable, digestible, that young people want to actually, I guess, connect with. Because I think everyone that I've ever come in contact with wants to buy a house in the future. But it's like, okay, because I've never had a lesson on how buying a house, what are the different steps? How can I get to that purchase? And also, how can I meet with a broker or a mortgage advisor that can give me this information that's accessible, someone I can connect with? And I think that's what's really important. I think it's relatability and digestibility.
Okay. So how does this translate into sort of content or material that brokers can start sort of working on, from where perhaps brokers have worked with I don't know, millennials, for example, to more extent, or maybe some of the Gen X generation? How does the sort of the content that brokers perhaps need to start looking at now need to adapt? Claire, so start with you. How would you, as a broker, now start looking at what you're producing or have been producing up until now, or perhaps your standard communication channels, and start to look to adapt?
I think trial and error is a huge thing, right? So if you're sitting and you maybe don't have much experience with social media, this is probably going to seem, us saying that you need to have a whole content plan and to split it up and to do multiple, that's not going to work for you. And I think it really just depends on how your own brokerage is set up. I think it's looking at, I'm a great fan of actually going to the source and asking them what's their concerns, listening to the customer. So we'd always do customer interviews and really spend time with our customer and understanding what makes them tick. Because there's no point me sitting, reading what I think Gen Z want or think or what they feel or do. It's actually just speaking to real people. And from there, it's amazing the amount of nuggets of information that you will get. Your brokers as well. You're speaking to people on the daily. You are speaking to these guys and understanding what their worries are. So really use that insight to shape your content. Now, I want to touch upon attention spans here, because I think it's really important when we're talking about social media. It's natural that we're going to talk about attention spans. And I think in this world with so much information out there, attention spans are shrinking. I think the last time I looked, it was they're sitting at 8.25 for the average human. 2 decades ago, that was 12. For Gen Z, it's sitting on around 8 seconds. A goldfish is 9 seconds. So, attention spans are shrinking. Sorry, a little bit of fact there for you, Peter, but attention spans are shrinking. But what I don't want that to do is to put you off posting content, because you're thinking, whoa, I've got 8 seconds to grab this person. In light of, and there's a lot of studies around this, even though attention spans are shrinking, if it's something that the younger audience see value in, they will listen. They will maybe take it offline and look for longer form content, listen to a podcast on it, and look for more information. So again, it harks back to really understanding what they care about and what actually matters to them. So that would be my key in all of this. Don't assume that, if I'm going to do a post on, maybe I have to go right back to basics. Maybe it's just like, how do I work as your broker? Like, things like that. Don't ever underestimate how those basic posts can really help somebody at the start of the homeowner journey.
Yeah, I agree. But I'm also aware of the fact that I know all the intermediaries that are probably on here right now are thinking, we don't have the time or capacity to start pushing content online amongst everything else that they're doing, right? So I think it's also about, how can we work with people that are already doing that work? So Claire does a brilliant job of actually creating her own content. But I know in the past, I've worked with a lot of brands, banks, to create content for them to use to then reach that audience that they're wanting to reach as well. So I think it's about working with, I guess, the term influencers. I hate that term, but work with influencers, content creators to, I guess, either one, help you create that content that you can use on your own social media pages, or using them, these content creators, and utilizing their already existing audience. So for myself, I've got an audience of nearly 50,000 across all of our social media platforms. And yeah, I know how hard a lot of these intermediaries try to garner their own audience, and sometimes it's just about utilizing an audience that already exists. So that can also be quite helpful as well.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of stuff you can also link. Just personally, there's also quite a lot of stuff out there you can link to, provide links to stuff, which is quite useful, which you can attach to your website, which is also very useful and informative. And I've also got two Gen Zs myself, so I can relate, Claire, to the attention span bit very, very closely.
I think as well, it's very easy for us. I'm just thinking, you know, when I'm speaking to our brokers and the time pressures, and I understand the challenges and the changes in the market and interest rates are rising. And also, let's not forget the media. The media just need to write an article, you know, one article goes out and then it explodes. You've got customers, you know, reaching out. What does this mean for me? And, you know, and that can really have an impact. So sometimes what we try and do is be proactive. So if we know there's going to be base rate change, right, listen, I'm going to schedule some content because I know I'm going to be getting a lot of questions around how this impacts me. You might be saying the same thing over and over and over, but it's kind of being proactive and it's preempting what you know, from customers coming through to you. Maybe loads are sending emails asking about a certain thing. That's great content for your social media. So don't ignore those little nuggets on the day-to-day that could help you create content. I think as well, flossum it's a term that's used within kind of marketing, and it's getting away from the need. I don't know if you'll agree with me here, Ola, that you don't necessarily all the time have to have a super polished, you know, video that's highly shot, edited. You can just, you know, actually the more authentic the content, the more real it is. You know, I've seen loads recently about people using ChatGPT. ChatGPT is great, but in a sea of everybody using ChatGPT, you know, the odd typo goes a long way because it shows that they've actually wrote this post themselves. So I think, yeah, it is difficult. We're not undermining it in any way, and we know how busy us as brokers can be, especially with all that's happening in the industry. But I think as well, it's your expectation of you know, what type of content that you need to put out there. Don't make it too hard for yourself.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, yeah, like you mentioned, Claire, I think it's just about putting something out there. And like, I think MPowered does a really good job themselves with their On the House podcast. Like I've obviously featured last month or a couple of months back, and just the feedback that my audience gave from just being on that. And then again, they're now like, oh, what's Empowered Mortgages? What do they do? And I think just putting something out there, and yes, it's easy for us to say be on every social media platform so you can cater to everyone's, I guess, need and want for their own consumerism. But I think just putting some form of content, whether that is that podcast or a couple of videos, it really does go a long way. And Gen Z really connect with that because, again, they see that there's a human on the other side of the screen and not just this really fancy, polished website with loads of financial jargon that they don't understand.
Are there sort of key themes that sort of keep coming up or resonating with the sort of the Gen Z generation? Because obviously they're 18 to 28, as you said. They're not really, I'm guessing they've not bought a house yet. They're still sort of in that process, or most of them haven't bought a house yet. They're still in the process of sort of coming up, starting to look. Are there certain key themes that sort of resonate or keep coming up with the Gen Z that maybe brokers could focus on?
Yeah, it's a good one. I think it's really important not to underestimate the Gen Z audience. And I know we both discussed this a week or so ago, but we're in this era now where a lot of people are able to make money outside of their traditional 9-to-5 jobs, right? And so I now have a lot of people that have come into quite huge amounts of money just from side hustles or starting their own business. And so I've seen a huge amount of people in the Gen Z like age range where they actually want to buy a home. That's actually a lot sooner than the 34 typical home buyers age. And so we're now seeing how do people with non-conventional jobs get onto the property ladder. So I think it's about how do we actually help those who are in their early 20s now have hundreds of thousands of pounds that they garner from just creating social media content and want to buy a property but struggle because they're not necessarily in a 9-to-5 job, or they don't really know, they don't think it's possible because it's just not been done before. So I think that's a really big trend that I'm seeing to grow at the moment.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's a lot of variety in the sense of it's not that traditional trajectory of, you know, go to university, get a job, stay in that job. And I guess us as, you know, intermediaries, how that looks like, you know, sometimes having to be a little bit more creative when it comes to which lenders and affordability. We did, you know, we are noticing trends with the younger demographic coming through to us now. Affordability, and I guess these trends are stuff that's kind of out of our control, but still very much at the heart of what they're concerned about. Affordability is huge. I know you'd probably argue that it's an issue, or it's something that a lot of homeowners, regardless of their age, are concerned about. But I think it's the understanding of how affordability works, and also in a sea of online calculators, which are great, but they're not tweaked to them personally. So that can be some people are coming to us thinking there's no way I'm getting on the ladder anytime soon, and it's actually sooner than they expect, and vice versa. So I think it's that education piece to you as brokers, them reaching out and getting advice based on their situation, because all of them might have a little bit more of a colourful career history. So it's like how that looks like when it comes to actually applying for a mortgage and being guided through that. Another trend we're seeing is, I guess we have to understand that these guys are growing up in a sea of online information, and it's misinformation. There's a recent Mintel report suggested 63% of Gen Z has been hit with some sort of being misled by information online in the past. So with that, then there is the result of that is mistrust, but I see that as a huge opportunity for us as regulated companies to be able to be that voice, to be able to talk with authority about a certain thing that's in the news. Maybe you're seeing something trending on TikTok, maybe something on YouTube, and really going out with your take on what that means and what that new product means for customers in their situation. So I think it's an opportunity, definitely, in a sea of a lot of unregulated advice, to be able to be that voice with authority.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that, Claire. Especially, I think we're going to touch on how you build the trust of Gen Z, but I think being that regulated voice, and I think it's really hard where there's a lot of financial content creators now who do a great job of sharing that information, but I think sometimes it also gives, I guess, Gen Z audience a bit of peace of mind when they see it's actually from a brokerage themselves. They're like, okay, this person is actually legit, this person is regulated, they actually, I think, just building that trust from that point of view, just knowing it's a credible source, can go a long way as well. And I think it's really important that isn't underestimated as well.
Okay, so what I'm sort of hearing is there's sort of a requirement or almost a feeling that the Gen Z generation want to have some sort of more empowerment. Is that correct, in sense of they kind of want more information at the front, they want to kind of do some research and understand more about how mortgages work, more information on affordability, perhaps more rather than the traditional sense, which was they'd go along to a mortgage broker, sit down in an office, perhaps spend an hour or two sitting in a chair and be told all about it. They kind of want to do their own research at the beginning, understand quite a lot, and then make a decision about perhaps which mortgage broker of the half a dozen they've researched they'd perhaps want to go and have a chat with. Is that fair, or is that maybe a bit of a generalization?
No, I think that is pretty fair. I think it's also really important that a lot of the Gen Z, because of the news we all consume, right, I think it's no secret that a lot of them feel that they are never getting on the property ladder, when, like Claire mentioned, actually for a lot of them it is possible. But because we don't have that, I guess, easily accessible and digestible content, and also I think the misinformation on the news, because they consume news and don't understand what's actually going on, they feel really out of touch, and they just feel like it's just never going to happen. So again, if you are a broker listening to this, it's meeting them and telling them that it is accessible, it is possible, and it actually might be a lot sooner than they realise as well.
We're seeing that a lot, Ola. It's something that's happening, and obviously with our audience being majority women coming through to us, we tend to see it with like single moms who maybe affordability, they think this is just never going to happen, and I think it is so important just to make them realize that you have to run the numbers, crunch the numbers based on your own personal situation, and that does go a long way. So I definitely agree with you there.
And just a thought, in terms of the actual process itself, is there, I'm guessing that they're the tech savvy generation themselves. Is there a definition or change in the way they'd like to approach the actual mortgage application process as well? So in terms of, once they've actually made a decision, is there a preference to actually do things remotely and actually apply online through a brokerage, or is it more of a preference still to sit down with somebody? Are you seeing any sort of trend on that?
We're fully remote, so we don't have a shop that people can go in. What I would say is that's never been an issue for any of our customers coming through to us. People are really time poor, and they're really busy. So that's, and as brokers, I know you'll understand this as well. Calls in the evenings, and we have our app that we launched at the back end of last year. That has been a real journey for us, because obviously we've built that with the view of the generation coming through. Everything's more digitalized. I'm not saying that you need to build an app, but I guess it's just looking at processes. And as I say, time seems to be the thing, time and time again, excuse the pun, coming up, that they're concerned about. If there's ways to shorten calls, if there's fact finds that can be sent digitally beforehand, or just stuff that really, really makes it that process more streamlined. I would also add that process is a big focus for them, understanding what's next in the process, understanding why do I need to do that, understanding, do I need to prepare anything for that stage? So transparency around that, as part of our app, we've got our guided journey, but that might, for you, that might be a PDF with just how you work from start to finish. Stuff like that, I think, really goes a long way. And it's just, that's our own experience at Meet Margo, and definitely process is key for them.
Yeah, you touched on a good point there, Claire. I think transparency is also a really big one, especially because mortgage brokers, all of them work so differently. So, some might be commission based, some might charge. I think that is a really big thing as well when it comes to how do Gen Z work with you. I think, again, just being very upfront and honest at the beginning, this is how we work. And again, that step-to-step process. And I hate to say it about my generation, but we are the generation that like our hands being held through a lot of these processes. So it's just about being in touch with that, and not assuming that we know it all, because we really don't. And that's one thing that I'm a big advocate about, because obviously this lack of education really doesn't have an impact later on during the different stages of life. Okay.
And in terms of the social media content itself, Claire, you talked about obviously down to 8 seconds or 7 seconds. Can't remember exactly. It's shorter than a goldfish is the key bit I remember.
Shorter than a goldfish. That's going to stick.
That's going to stick, exactly. But in terms of, obviously, you've got a hook. You've obviously got a hook around affordability on some content you've created. What's the ideal length of trying to keep the videos once you've actually created one? I mean, assuming
it's not one size fits all, Peter. This is where we just can't give you a straight answer. I think, again, it comes down to how comfortable you are. You might be a broker sitting at home. I don't want to do talking heads. I don't want to do 2 minutes long talking heads. That's not going to work for me. And also, I don't have the time for that. So it could be a shorter piece of content. It could be a carousel where you're explaining. I think as a first step, it's really understanding what those pieces of content are from your customers that you've helped currently that fit within that demographic. If you don't have customers that fit within that demographic, I urge you to just speak to people of that age and really find out what matters to them, and start small. I don't want, don't bite off more than you can chew, because Ola, you will agree with me, when you're faced with a creative block and you're trying to come up with content, it can be really overwhelming on top of just trying to do the day-to-day. So I think start small and experiment. And don't get too disheartened if you've done, if you've put out a post on stamp duty and you've got 1 like and there's just, I'm going to delete that. Don't delete it, because that content might be of use to somebody somewhere in their journey. And I think that's a key thing for us. Don't get too caught up in the how many views or metrics. Yes, it helps to kind of give you an indication whether people engaged with that post. But I think, people, especially the way we know that Gen Z are now starting to search for information, they might stumble upon your page, scroll, read a post and be like, actually, yes, I want to work with this person. So I think that would be my takeout. Ola, I don't know if you've any more thoughts there.
No, I agree. I think in this era of social media, I think a lot of us are guilty of just looking at the likes, looking at the views, when actually I think it's really important to remember you actually just don't know who's watching. And I can say this off the back of like so many people listening to my podcast, and with a podcast you don't really get that instant gratification, you don't get likes, you can only just see views. And it's only when people are like I've been listening to your podcast for the last year, I've now finally bought a property because of the information you've shared. So again, it's about holding their hand up until the point where they're finally ready. And they'll a lot of you more brokers, you'll be see that they have been a part of the journey, but you just didn't know until they're actually ready to buy that property. But yeah, I think it's really important to remember that as well.
Yeah. I mean, the only other comment I'd perhaps throw in, and I don't know if you both subscribe to this as well, is maybe don't overload the videos with too much content as well. I think there's sometimes
and jargon.
And jargon. I mean, there's sometimes a danger. When I've done some sort of occasional videos and stuff, is you try and get too much information across, and you get too technical, which can blow people's minds. It's maybe just try and get 2 or 3 clear points across if you're trying to talk about home ownership or affordability, rather than trying to get too technical, which is always a danger. Because I think as people who work in the industry, whether you're a broker or a lender, you're going, I know this, and this, and I'm trying to sort of, and it's maybe just get 2 or 3 clear points across, which, are the important bits, and maybe leave the other stuff for the interview or for a phone call or whatever. And, try and get to the clear point you're getting across, and leave the other stuff for a separate video or for something else. It's just,
agree.
It's too overwhelming, and it can be, and I always challenge our brokers on this, because you're on lender calls, you're speaking to BDMs, you're in the thick of the acronyms, and then you're jumping into customer calls, and how you're speaking within the team to maybe the customers, 2 different things. So that is something. Language is a huge thing at Meet Margo, and we are constantly working at tweaking processes, simplifying, and it's not dumbing down. When you're simplifying a product or missing out detail, you're not doing them wrong. You're not from a customer point of view, the thing is you want to hook them, you want to create interest, you want them asking more questions, and I think as well a key point is don't ever think that the comments or your DMs is not part of your social media engagement. I think that's where we find, anyway, I don't know, Ola, if you would agree with me, but that's where some of the magic happens. You might post something and then there's been a few comments off the back. Jump into those comments, and your responses can really be part of somebody stumbling upon and seeing how you've responded things. And likewise, DMs, our DMs are very active. So what you're maybe not seeing on the actual grid post, people are chatting away in the DMs and coming back. And I think especially for the younger generation who maybe they're not ready to jump on a call with you. They're not ready to, they maybe don't have their deposit saved. They're actually just really at the start of their journey, and they just want to know. We always accommodate those questions, because they are the home buyers of the future. So if they've had a positive experience with them early on, then they're more likely to kind of come back to us when the time's right.
Okay. Yeah, agreed. I think it's touch points is really, sorry, Peter. Touch points in terms of, like you mentioned, Claire, if they're not necessarily, I guess, commenting in the section, comment section, DMs, it's about, just, I guess, what's the word? Nurturing them to the point where they are finally ready to be like, okay, I'm ready to buy my property. Or they might think, okay, I've got £5,000 saved. I just need an extra 5,000, then I can come back and actually work with you. So again, don't underestimate those those touch points on social media as well. Because in an era of social media, sometimes we become less human, but actually engaging with them in that way is really important as well.
Okay. This seems, talking about direct messages seems a good point. We've got some comments coming through, and there's a couple of good questions on the comment section. I think first one was from a guy called lady called Radu. How do Gen Z's home ownership plans compare with the previous generations? Do they dream of more freedom of renting than owning a house?
That's a good question, honestly. So I see online that some people now just want to rent. They like the flexibility. But if I'm being completely honest with you, the goal of home ownership is still there. And, it's so funny because I still don't really understand why it's the biggest goal for this generation. I think it's for all generations. I think the UK, we are a generation of home owners. Yeah. And I think what's hard is that we've had previous generations where houses were very affordable, very cheap. And I think because of the fact that now it's just become a lot harder, I think a lot of people base their success on whether or not they bought that home. So I do think it's still a very big goal. Claire, I'm not sure if you agree at all or not.
Yeah, no, I would definitely. I think homeowners in general, we can only base it based on the guys that are coming through to us, and they all want a home because they're speaking to us. I actually went out on social recently about the most unhinged ways that people have saved for a deposit. And if you go under our socials and look at some of the responses, people are going to long lengths to be able to get onto the property ladder. So there's definitely, I wouldn't say there's a lot of narrative around generation rent, but, you know, from what some other lenders are doing, trying to, you know, account for rent as part of affordability, all of things like that, I think it's very much, and it's again a cultural thing within the UK. They want on the ladder, and it's another success metric, isn't it? That, you know, that they've got on the ladder.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think people are renting through a lack of choice about being able to buy in a lot of circumstances. I don't think renting long term is a choice. I think it's a forced circumstances for a lot of people, unfortunately. Next question we've got, which I think is a good one. Where do websites fit with Gen Z? Are they less important? Are interactive websites better?
Good question. Claire, do you want to take that? Or
I would say they're just as important. Again, it's part of that omni-channel. You know, there maybe you've got a blog post there that goes into a subject in a lot more detail. You go onto your socials, you see 1 or 2 points from that blog shared on your socials. So I think they definitely, the longer form, don't ever you know, take away from that longer form piece of content. Yes, we can probably all get better in terms of how we position that content and break it down. And I guess this is where SEO and all of that comes in. But I think if anything, it's just writing that content in a way that is going to resonate with them, in a way that it taps on what they're concerned about, but also in a way that's jargon free and back to basics, not dumbing down, just, you know, keep it simple. Because when you do weight it in, Peter, I know you've said this as well, they just switch off. So we've said previously, you know, they might be snacking on content elsewhere, and then when the time's right, be wanting to do a deep dive more into other aspects of home ownership. So I do feel that do not ignore it. It definitely serves its purpose.
Yeah, I agree. I think home ownership and buying your first property is going to be the biggest purchase that anyone is ever going to make in their lifetime, right? And so trust and credibility is 2 things that are so important. So having that website is definitely crucial, I would say, as someone who's 27, because yes, it's great having that social media presence, but also, let's say if I want to go into the website now and there's no website, in an era of scams taking place, I think a website really just, I guess, solidifies that trust and credibility as well. So yeah, I definitely think a website's really important. And I guess interactivity, I don't think it's the be all or end all. I think all they need is knowing that if they have further questions, a contact number is really important. Again, we're in an era where social contact us pages don't really exist anymore. It's all email. So if you do have phone numbers to hand, I think it's really important so they know they can also pick up the phone as well.
And I think as well on that, just what we've learned from, I guess you've got your desktop view, making sure that it's compatible with mobile, because after all, we're on our mobile. So, you know, I do know from user experience, like a lot of people are going to be, especially the younger audience, accessing your website. So if they go onto your website and it isn't compatible with mobile, and it's formatted in a way that maybe, you know, it's coming across, there's lots of errors or whatever, that can really be a deciding factor to maybe not work with you. So it's just making sure that you need to think of how they're accessing that information. So if it's going to be on mobile, and I mean, there's analytics there that can tell you from your website where most people are accessing and what devices they're accessing on. So I definitely make sure that it's just all, you know, it's compatible for all of those devices if possible.
Okay, thank you very much. One from Joe, which I think is an interesting one. How do you deal and stay positive with the keyboard warriors on your posts that just become negative and confrontational? We've all had them. So
yeah.
I don't know first. I've got a couple of thoughts, but I'll answer that one last. So that you go first.
I think for some time, so on a medium like TikTok, I think any engagement is good engagement, because the more comments you get, the more views you get on there. I think when it comes to maybe TikTok or YouTube, for me, I am just someone that just deletes them and just leave it. I think it's really important not to fight back. I mean, sometimes it can be really easy to want to, but I think, yeah, delete, block, move on. That's my personal take on it.
Yeah, I would agree. We have been we haven't had too many. I think if we look at the channels, I would say Instagram is our main playground, and it seems to be a much nicer space. And then when we go into TikTok, there's a lot more savage comments. Again, some of them you tend to find the more eyeballs, the more views. And maybe if you've had a bit more of a an opinionated hook on your post, you tend to find if it encourages responses and there is more views, that there's going to be more negativity in there. And usually the posts that perform well are because people are arguing in the comments, which is not necessarily nice. But in terms of like if they're negative to you or in any way, you have to it's part and parcel of the online space. And some of the best online influencers, I know that this is an ongoing thing, and you just have to, you can't take it on board. You know your worth, you know how much you know about a product, and just ignore the haters, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with it. Just the ignore. I mean, the worst one I've ever had is just basically is Mail Online. You post articles on the Mail Online, and some of the comments you get on Mail Online are just unbelievable. Just ignore it. You just don't give. I mean, they feed off oxygen, so just deprive them of oxygen and just ignore. It's just basically my view on that side.
The only time we would Sorry, I was going to say that the only time we would ever get into it is if maybe they've made a comment that and part of their response it's incorrect, or they've maybe picked up on something wrong, and it's an opportunity to educate them. So I know recently there was a post about insurance that we put up, and somebody was really arguing about why they wouldn't just dip into their savings. So then we actually used it as an opportunity to just, it would be like a customer who was pushing back on insurance. Because again, if somebody's reading that post, they can see the narrative. So again, you can use it sometimes to your advantage to kind of really use it as an opportunity to educate who's maybe thinking in a similar negative way. But yeah, if it's in any way personal or about you or about what you're saying, just
yeah. I mean, I think it's arguing for the sake of arguing, or just being slightly difficult. I think there's difference, but yeah, absolutely. I think we've got time for one more before we sort of round up. Lee has put, what sort of tone do Gen Zs prefer on social media? Personal, relaxed, professional, informative? I see a lot of brokers being more relaxed and sometimes following trends online now.
Oh, good question. I personally think relaxed and personable. I think relatability is so important, especially where personal finance can be really boring. It's always nice and helpful to see a fun, upbeat, personable person. I think that's really important because, again, where we're in this generation where some of our home buyers now are actually getting a little bit younger, sometimes they find some brokers a bit scary or intimidating. So I think it's really important that you break that barrier down. And I think sometimes just having a personable, friendly approach can be really handy. That's how I'd see it if I was to buy my next home. Well, my first home.
No, I agree with you, Ola. I think you need to put yourself in their shoes. This is a subject that, yes, they have done a lot of research and they want to know more about, but it's quite intimidating. And if we look at the industry in general, if we go back to the reputation it has, and I think this is the opportunity now with this new Gen Zs coming through to really be that human, not to be the rigid kind of brand that computer says no, and just to be, and that makes you more relatable. And I think I've been on a few talks where Gen Z has come up, and some people are worried, do I need to get down with the kids? Absolutely do not be getting down with the kids. Be yourself. You will have more respect being yourself. But I think it's just, and don't change the way you are just because you want to relate to more Gen Z. I think it's very much about being relatable and not worrying too much about being suited and booted for. In fact, the opposite. If I'm going on to stories or anything and I've got the hair tied up, no makeup on, that stuff, like there doesn't seem to be any trend there that indicates actually, me not looking that great has an impact on me looking, professional. And I think that would be the main takeaway. Just be yourself, be a person, because people buy people, right?
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, I guess they're after you as a person and the information you've got, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. They just want to know that you know your stuff, and if they have questions, you are the person that they can go back to for the reliable source of information. I think that's all it comes down to at the end of the day. And if you do have a more professional touch, I don't think that's the be all or end all. I think it comes down to the trust, credibility. Can I trust what you're saying, especially in an era of fake news and people pushing different agendas? Absolutely.
Okay. If I could just ask you for some final thoughts, if I can. If you're a broker out there, what sort of things could do tomorrow? So if I can ask you for your sort of start, stop, continue, really. Now, I know this is obviously a difficult one, given that you don't obviously know exactly what brokers do at the moment, but if you were sort of a traditional brokerage, what would you sort of start, stop, continue, if you were sort of following up from today, really?
Do you want me to go
first?
You go first,
Yeah. you go first. I'll let you go
first. Okay, right. Well, I would probably start being more active on my socials if I'm not already. Being more active, showing up, being consistent. I'm not asking for 5 posts a week. I mean, just showing up in a consistent way. If that's 1 post a week, start with 1 post a week, see how you get on. We know the data, everything is pointing towards this is the future. So it's coming. If it's not an issue right now, it's going to be an issue in the future. So it's important we meet them where they're at. We communicate with Gen Z in a way that they want to be communicated with. And I also think when it comes to the stop, it's probably not just assuming that you know what they want, actually asking the question, actually taking the time to listen. If you've got a bank of customers already within that, the older Gen Zs that are on the property ladder, I've mentioned it before in the call. I cannot stress enough, just listening to your customer. That's where the answers are. There's no point assuming. And then continue. Oh, what would I say? Continue. I think probably on the day-to-day, continue looking at your processes, continue working, at Meet Margo, we'd always talk about marginal gains. We're always tweaking. We're always trying to improve, listening to your team, listening, if you are in a bit of a bigger brokerage where it's not just you as a broker, it's admin, all of that. If you are tweaking processes, that's going to impact some of the rest of the team. So start now, start small, and then hopefully, you can grow into those changes instead of overnight having to suddenly realize that, you're digitalizing part of it or things like that. So my thing would be always continuously tweaking the process and reviewing the process and seeing where you can, slowly but surely adapt things to suit that audience. Hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think kind of echoing what Claire said, I think start understanding the Gen Z audience more. I think, like you said, Claire, asking questions. What do you want to know? What would you like from us? What aren't you understanding? What's in the news that's confusing? I think stop, overthinking and overcomplicating things. I think it literally is just as simple as what Claire said, whether that's one infographic post, whether that's one video. It doesn't have to always be video. I'm not someone that loves being on video all the time, so I do a mixture of infographics and video content, and then I think it's just continue evolving. I think don't stop with just the one post. If it's not working, continue evolving, see what does work, and again just keep asking the questions. What are you guys enjoying? How do you prefer to consume your media, and things like that. That's what I'd say as my 3 final tips.
Fantastic. That all sounds like fantastic advice from both of you. Claire, Ola, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time. I've been Peter Stimson. This has been Home Truths. Thank you, everyone who's joined to listen. Hope that's been really useful. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for your time, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.